This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. Well, not exactly City Talk. In fact, not at all City Talk. Today, it's the Middle East. It's Israel, Palestine, Egypt, Syria, and what became of the Arab Spring. To look at the Middle East today is my frequent guest here, Richard Murphy. Richard is former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Syria, the Philippines, and Mauritania. He has served as Assistant U.S. Secretary of State for Near Eastern and South Asian Affairs. He has been named Career Ambassador. He has been a Senior Fellow for the Middle East at the Council on Foreign Relations, and he is a frequent TV commentator and widely consulted expert. And he's just back from the region. Welcome back, Mr. Ambassador.
Great to see you.
You're just back from Lebanon. What's going on? Now, you were here 6 months ago in early March. The winds of the Arab Spring were blowing in Tunisia and Egypt. What's happened? What's going on?
Well, in Lebanon, it's quiet. They're edgy because of the troubles going on in Syria and wondering if that's going to explode, what's going to be the impact on Lebanon. But they've managed to sort of defuse the explosion which they thought was coming when the International Tribunal investigating the assassination of Prime Minister Hariri started to go public with its indictments. So far, that's
Lebanon,
passed.
Lebanon, in a sense, is quiet and off the table for the moment.
Well, yeah. I mean, when the Arab Spring started, one of the jokes was that well, you won't see a revolution here against the government because we don't have a government.
Right.
Now they do.
Okay. Let's then take that sort of tour that I laid out in the intro. Let's start with Syria. When we talked 6 months ago, the winds were blowing, but obviously they weren't blowing in the public squares of Syria. What's happened in the last 6 months?
Well, the official line in Syria is that some international thugs and plotters have incited the people against their government.
Well, we know that's true, but what else?
Yeah. Well, that's never changed as the official line. What's happened is I think the people in Syria resented, like the people in Egypt and Tripoli and Tunis, the fact that they were subjects and not citizens, to put it briefly. They wanted a share in decision-making. They wanted jobs. The problems that are spread across the region, and Syria was no exception.
What about the religious/ethnic lines and divisions? Are they similar to what we've seen in the rest of the Middle East between Sunni and Shia and various elements of Shia and the classes? Sort that out a bit.
Well, you really have to go country by country in the Middle East. In Lebanon, it's a mosaic. It's been a place of refuge for different sects, different faiths over the centuries. In Egypt, it's homogeneous. It's almost 90% Sunni Muslim, 10% Coptic Christian. In Tunis, it's 100% Sunni Muslim.
So it varies, and therefore these religious/ethnic conflicts are endemic in the region, but depending on where you are. Talk about Syria in particular. Talk about Assad, his base of power, what's likely to happen, the relationship with Russia, for example, and China.
Well, he comes from the minority group called the Alawis, who managed to join the ranks of the Shia not that long ago. They were called an offshoot of Islam, then they came back to be considered Muslims in the last about a generation and a half ago. Mm-hmm. Now, not all Alawis are governing Syria. I mean, it's 10, 12% of the population. There are poor Alawis, there are disenfranchised Alawis, like there are in every other community. But they do control the military, they control the security services, and the president has carried along the way his father built the state to ensure that all of these services report to his office, and that that's the way he has continued to control the country. Where they're going, I don't think anyone's sure. There was an expectation that the Syrian regime would be swept out of office as quickly as Mubarak or as Ben Ali in Tunis. It hasn't happened. When you ask
Armed forces
people,
and security forces haven't, moved away from the regime?
no, they haven't. I mean, there's talk of defectors now and some arms spreading among the dissidents, but from the beginning, the dissidents have been very firm in their position that it should be a peaceful challenge to the regime, that they would lose an armed challenge. Sure. As they look around, some of the elements, such as the Christians in Syria, they worry because as a minority government, the Alawite dominant party has been, call it, protective of another minority, of the Christians. They didn't have the persecutions that we've seen in Iraq. Mm-hmm. In fact, the Iraqi Christian community has in very large numbers moved into Syria to be safe. So they're nervous. The business community has built ties with the regime and vice versa. So they see at risk their fortunes if the regime should be overthrown, and they don't like the uncertainties that would come. The concern about uncertainty that you find today, I submit, in Washington, in Moscow, in other world capitals about the future of Syria is shared within Syria. And that's helping to keep the regime afloat.
And they've been willing to use firepower on opponents, including civilians, clearly.
2,900 dead.
According to the UN, and that's
reports.
what the UN could count.
Yeah.
But then the Russians and the Chinese veto in the Security Council resolutions to helpfully stem that. So there's real politic here. What are the Russians looking for? A port on, in Syria?
Well, they have their only port on the Mediterranean is in Syria.
Right, and then it becomes a naval base for the Russians?
Well, yeah, I don't know how important that really is
right.
in terms of Russian strategy these days, but it's bound
but
to
it's
be
an interest.
It's an interest in arms sales to Syria, an interest in standing by a country that was considered a strategic ally in the bloc.
What about the Chinese?
I think the Chinese, in supporting the Russians and vetoing that Security Council resolution, were saying, look, we don't like the way things have gone in Libya. The West took a seemingly innocuous resolution about Libya and stretched it, and mission creep came in, and now the Air Force of NATO is playing the major role.
So they didn't want a repetition of what they saw, think they saw in Libya.
They don't like the idea that this might one day become a problem for China in their province where there are Muslim dissidents out west in China. The Russians don't like the idea that Chechens should be adopted by NATO or anyone. That's, again, part of the attitude.
Okay. Let's move east then. Let's look at Egypt. What we've seen over the last several days has been demonstrations by Coptic Christians, then being attacked by Muslims, and then actually being fired upon by the army and security forces a couple of days ago. What's going on there?
Well, there's an ugly fringe among some of the Muslim groups in Cairo, but I recall that in Tahrir Square we were all very pleased to notice the Christian-Muslim unity in Tahrir Square when this started. And the other night in Cairo, there were Muslims coming to support the Christians. So I think you've got the work of some fanatics stirring things up, and then an incompetence on the part of the police and the army, which is not any skills in riot control.
So it's incompetence rather than some pernicious attempt by the army, for example. It's been speculated that they want to foment discord so they retain their privileged position as keepers of the nation. I mean, is that too absurd?
I think that's overreach, frankly. Yeah, I think incompetence at handling demonstrators. Mubarak wasn't faced with demonstrators for those decades he was in power, and they don't have much skill at it, at managing it. They're also, by all reports, uncomfortable with being out front as the acting government of the acting authority of Egypt. And they like to be back quietly behind the curtain, a major power in the state, but not as liable visible to all of the criticism that the political authorities get.
Okay. Let's stay with Egypt and then move back west to Palestine and in Israel. There have been public rioting in and around the Israeli embassy. There seems to be heightened anti-Israeli feeling, at least on the street. Is that the case? What does it mean in terms of the relationships of these two states? I mean, certainly they don't want to go back to a situation where they are possibly armed combatants.
No, I don't think there's any desire, and particularly on the part of the Egyptian military. But the Egyptian people are not looking for a war with Israel.
What are they looking for? What do they want? What are they expressing?
Well, in the case of the attack on the Israeli embassy, I think that they're expressing unhappiness with the way the former regime, the Mubarak regime, dealt with the Palestinian issue, particularly in Gaza, keeping Gaza isolated and not playing the part that Egyptians have always felt they should play as a lead actor in the Arab world, that they, Mubarak stepped back and let the Israelis do pretty much what they wanted in Gaza because he had his own concerns about the radical movement in Gaza infiltrating somehow across Sinai and poisoning the situation in Cairo.
Okay, so read some tea leaves in Egypt. What are some plausible avenues? Obviously, we can't predict.
They're going to need a good deal of economic assistance. The fact that they had a rebellion or revolution, whatever you want to call it, in the shape of what's happened still is evolving. They didn't create 1 million jobs. So they need to find ways and support to stimulate their economy. And they need to run a fair election. In another few months, a couple months, you're going to have the parliamentary election. Next year, the presidential election there. And we certainly hope it's going to be supportive of a multi-party democratic development.
Okay.
So far, so good.
Okay.
But it could go sour, it could go well.
Okay, let's talking about things that have traditionally gone sour with periods of seeming to go good, and that is the Palestine-Israel issue. And clearly this has been one that has been in the headlines, certainly with the Palestinian attempt to gain membership into the UN. We have the president then going to the UN, declaring that that's not the way it should go. We have Israelis building settlements in Jerusalem. What's going on here?
Well, Israel under Prime Minister Netanyahu's leadership is going hell-bent for leather to make sure that if there is something called a Palestinian state in the future, it's going to be the equivalent of Bantustans were in South Africa. This is clearly
the effect, and it appears that it certainly does appear to be the intent of the regime to do exactly that. So clearly, it would seem that Netanyahu certainly does not want any kind of if you will, true Palestinian state?
Personally, that's the way I feel.
Is this
and
counterproductive?
obviously it's the
Go
way
ahead.
the Palestinians have been reacting. They don't want that. What they want is a state that can stand on its own, be a viable state, and that's been American policy. So we have constantly said, look, it's got to be achieved through direct negotiations.
Right.
That
That was
theme.
the argument that Obama made at the UN.
Yeah. And that's based in part on the success of the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty. That treaty only got started to be negotiated when secret assurances were given by Israelis to Egyptian representatives. I think that met in Morocco months before the treaty was actually negotiated. And ever since, we've said, look, real progress only comes when the parties directly concerned are working out the basic framework.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, things haven't gone well, and Egypt was a state, a substantial state on its own. The Palestinians are not. They are divided politically, which has made it easier, and of course we help perpetuate that division by our own policies between Fatah and Hamas. But they're divided, and the Israelis, the Israeli community, political community, has moved to the right over the years. And the idea of surrendering, retreating to something like the lines of 1967 is a terrible concept for many Israelis.
And not only Israelis, but their allies and advocates in the United States and elsewhere as well, it seems.
I think their advocates in the United States hear only one line out of Israel, which is the right-wing Israeli line, and that has continued to be, look, our state is in constant danger of annihilation, extinction, being savaged, torn apart. But the idea of peace really doesn't ring very persuasively.
But it seems as if there is more internal discussion and opposition and multiple narratives, if you will, within Israel than there seems to be out. And is that a good thing for Israel as a state?
To have just the one line?
Right.
Well, I don't think so, no. I think it's a threat to the long-term existence of Israel as a state for the Jewish people, because demography is weighing in against them on that.
So the adage demography is destiny. Well, then explain Netanyahu's behavior in light of this demographic destiny. You reach out and establish and secure before that's possible, but don't you need internal changes as well?
Well, look, I don't consider him a leader who indulges in fantasies, yet part of it seems to be that one day the Palestinians will just go away and not be a problem, or remain in such a paralyzed, minor position, politically, economically, militarily, that there'll be no threat to the Israel that he wants to continue building for the future.
Are the Palestinians, have they shown the capability of presenting a coherent nation and a coherent state, given the massive internal conflicts that we see on the ground, in fact?
Well, no, they haven't had much chance to show it yet. There were moments in the 90s in particular, right around the time of Oslo in the early 90s, when it looked promising that they would start to move ahead when Arafat was in charge. But since then, the internal disagreements about can we achieve peace through negotiations or must we fight for it, that dichotomy has hardened between Hamas and Fatah. And yet, as I said, our policy has helped split the Palestinians and solidified the division between Gaza and the West Bankers, Gazans and West Bankers, which is going to have to, I think, be rethought in Washington and elsewhere. And personally, I think, radical as it may sound, we better start looking at our overall terrorism policies, and that anyone labeled a terrorist cannot be spoken to, cannot be dealt with in any way whatsoever.
Elucidate.
Well, we've tied our hands very tightly. You know, our diplomats are not allowed to sit down with Hamas and talk the situation over. We're just that's just not done. It's not allowed.
Is there back channel?
Not to my knowledge.
There's no back channel and no
So
front channel.
You're relying on third parties to
Who have their
give
own
you some
interests.
insights, who have their own interests in telling you a certain slant on the story.
What is it that prevents what appears to be sort of a rational foreign policy of at least engaging in conversation? What prevents that conversation?
Well, I don't think the current leadership in Israel wants it to take place.
Well, what about the
They're-
leadership in Washington?
Look,
Is there leadership in Washington? Go ahead.
You watched the, if I may call it, the spectacle of the U.S. Congress leaping to its feet. What was it? 17 standing ovations when the Prime Minister of Israel came and, in effect, attacked American policy of long years, far
Attacking
before Obama.
Right. What explains it?
Well, they have gotten, over the years, only the one line out of Israel. And as you were suggesting, there are many other voices in Israel that haven't been heard.
What is it? Does the feelings of evangelical Christians towards Israel, biblical Israel, and as well as contemporary Israel, does that play in this congressional applause? Does the fact that large numbers of members of Congress periodically travel to Israel? It's all of those? What is it?
Do evangelicals vote? As far as I know, yes. So,
Okay.
And there's substantial elements in several of our states. So that's, I think that's maybe enough of an explanation. And their view is one which in the long run is not that friendly towards the Jews, because either, as you know, either you convert on the day of judgment or you go down.
I know the nuns taught us well.
Did they? Yeah, okay.
I know this. Talk about the U.S. foreign policy. Just on the Palestinian-Israel question, Obama gives this speech in May where he makes explicit sort of a condition of pre-1967 borders. He gets hammered.
With swaps.
With swaps. He gets hammered. Yeah. Then the Palestinians apply for membership in the UN, and he gives this other speech. To me, listening to both of those speeches and then subsequently reading them, there's a fundamental contradiction here. Do we have a policy in the Middle East in this area?
Not right now.
Well, what is it?
Now it's vamp till there's a more opportune moment, and that may mean as late as after the next presidential election.
So we're just reacting. I mean, this administration is simply ping-ponging in reaction to immediate crises? Go ahead, say yes.
He has been pushed back from his positions of a year ago and 6 months ago. I'm sure the administration would say no, that we've always said that there had to be direct negotiations, and we have. But the situation's gotten, the formula's gotten more and more unreal given the political weakness of the Palestinians and the great strength of the Israelis.
Okay, let's globalize this, or at least regionalize it. What about the United States and its impact in the region? I mean, is it in decline, and is it continued to be in decline? Where are our leverage points? We're not.
I think that we're at a moment, and just how it's going to develop, let's see. But we're at a moment when our friends are less certain about our strengths, and our enemies are less certain about, do they have to fear us? Is that a moment of decline? Let's
let's
leave
change
the emotional
the
word out.
Okay.
But I think it is a time when we have to do more listening to what the in the Arab world, what the new voices are saying and asking for. And I'd remind you that, you know, at least I've never sensed in the last 50 years, our values and the values of the Arab demonstrators were more in tune.
Yeah, excuse me, and our friends happen to be some of the most pernicious, outrageous medieval folks, starting with the Saudis.
You know, if you're saying you're going to run a foreign policy based on morality and nothing else, fine. But foreign policy always has interests to balance as well.
Thank you. Thank you for getting me off my idealism and back to real politic. Given the change, the ever churning Middle East, what's next? What's the next thing we're going to be surprised about?
We might be surprised by a more active international effort on the Arab-Israeli peace, on the Palestinian-Israeli. I don't see it yet. And the fact is, we have straight-armed the UN, the Europeans for decades. You stay out of this. This is our peace process. We're the power. We're the only ones the Israeli trust. No one's going to be able to move the process ahead. Well, we haven't moved it ahead these last few years.
Is there an inclination on the part of these potential other actors to take that leadership? Obviously, one of the reasons why we did it was because we were able to do it.
Yeah, well, it's true. The Israelis only trust the United States to be a steady friend.
Okay.
And, you know, we're in the silly season of the presidential politics when this one and that one talks about let's not throw our best ally under the bus, which has been the last thing the administration's been doing. But I don't know whether the UN can come up with a focused, consistent, and strong policy to move ahead, whether the Europeans can pull together behind it. But I think we have to be listening more carefully, more openly to other voices than our own will to, you know, to say we're the leaders, just stay away.
Okay, thank you. As always, another seminar in international relations. My thanks to Ambassador Richard Murphy for joining me today. Next week, we talk with Commissioner Fatima Shama, head of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, here on CUNY TV. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.